The wind had a way of speaking out in barren ridge. Sometimes it whispered like memory. Sometimes it howled like grief. That evening, it chose the latter. Dry dust swept over the parched earth, curling around the wooden fence posts of Mary Ann Colton's ranch, rattling the windows and dragging long, aching groans from the weather-worn boards of her cabin. She stood on the porch with her hands curled around a chipped mug of bitter coffee, watching the horizon as if waiting for it to speak. 2 years had passed since Daniel rode off to war. He left at dawn, riding tall in the saddle of Flint, his warhorse, a black stallion with eyes like storm glass and hooves that struck sparks from stone. There had been no goodbye worth remembering, just a firm embrace, the press of her silver cross into his hand, and his final promise murmured against her hair. "I'll be back before the cold sets in." The cold had come and gone. Twice. She still waited. The ranch was no grand thing. 40 acres of sun-bitten scrubland, a sagging barn, and the skeletons of 24 cattle picked clean by hardship and wolves. But it had been enough for the two of them once. It was more than enough for one. She kept the land alive by the grit under her nails and the rifle over the door. She mended fences with weather-cracked hands, traded eggs in town for coffee and salt, and stitched her husband's name into every morning prayer. The people of Barren Ridge spoke less to her now. The friendly nods had become tight smiles. A few tried kindness, most tried subtlety. Might be time to move on, the storekeeper had said just last week, placing a sack of cornmeal on the counter and not meeting her eye. War's been over a year. Them boys that made it back, well, they made it back. She left without replying. They didn't understand. No telegram had come. No name listed in the paper's black column. No body. Daniel wasn't gone. He was simply delayed. And so she waited. Every dusk, she scanned the ridge. Every sunrise, she boiled water for two. She didn't wear black. She wore the same faded blue blouse he liked best, and every stitch of it held something of him. On this evening, the clouds broke open over the horizon, sending rain that came down heavy and fast. Mary Ann didn't retreat inside. She stood still, letting it soak into her hair, cooling the fire always smoldering in her chest. Somewhere beyond the hills, thunder rolled like distant cannon fire, and she imagined the war reaching its fingers back in time to touch her again. Then came the sound that pulled her breath short, a hoofbeat. Not many rode out this way. The path to her ranch was narrow and stubborn, choked with rock and thorn. Most travelers veered north or south, avoiding the place altogether. But this was no wagon or trader's mule. This was a steady, deliberate stride, familiar and weighty, cutting through the storm like a heartbeat returned. She set the mug down, slowly stepped off the porch, and reached for the Henry rifle leaning by the door. The figure emerged from the wall of rain as though pulled from memory. A tall horse, black as a storm cloud, nostrils flared with steam. "Flint," she gasped. Her knees went loose beneath her. That was Flint. No mistake. The white mark over his eye, the old scar on his shoulder from a bear swipe years back. He was unmistakable. But Flint wasn't alone. A man sat in the saddle. He wore a long coat, dark and soaked through. A wide-brimmed hat concealed his face, but he sat easy in the saddle, like he'd been there a while. Not wounded, not hurried, just quiet, measured. Mary Ann raised the rifle, her heart pounding loud enough to drown the rain. "That's my horse," she said, voice low and sharp. "Where'd you get him?" The stranger didn't flinch. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, hands raised to show he carried no weapon. The horse didn't shy from her. Flint came right up to the fence, as if he belonged home. "I didn't steal him," the man said. His voice was rough, worn down like river stone. "He came to me, about 3 weeks back. Found me near death in the canyon pass. That horse doesn't wander." "I know." The man reached into his coat slowly, carefully, and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He tossed it at her feet. She bent and unwrapped it with trembling fingers. The cross. Her cross. Silver, dulled by time but still intact. The leather cord she tied around Daniel's neck. She stared at it as though it might speak. "Where's my husband?" she asked. The stranger didn't answer right away. He took off his hat. His face was lean, lined by sun and hardship. No one she recognized. His eyes held something deep and haunted. "He died in the war," he said, as the rain softened to a hush. "But he didn't die in vain." She kept the rifle raised. "What are you to him?" He looked down, then past her, as if seeing something far away. "He saved my life. More than once. Told me about this place. About you. Said if anything happened, I was to bring Flint back. And that cross." "You're a soldier?" "Was," he said. "A scout. Most of my unit didn't make it. We were caught in Virginia. Prison camp held us a while." She watched him like a hawk, searching for cracks in his story. But something in the way he held himself, the pain behind the calm, rang true. Even so, truth wasn't enough. "Why now?" she asked. "Why not months ago?" "Because I didn't know if I'd make it out. And I had something to finish." He swayed slightly, then stumbled. A patch of red bloomed through the fabric at his side. She saw now what she'd missed in the dark and rain. He was wounded. "You're bleeding." He didn't reply, just leaned against the fence post and let his head fall forward. She hesitated, war still playing in her mind, battles of trust and fear. Then she lowered the rifle. "Get inside, before you fall over." He looked up at her with something like gratitude, then pushed off the post and staggered toward the porch. As she opened the door, her eyes flicked once more to the cross in her hand. Daniel was gone, but something of him had returned, and the wind, for the first time in years, carried not just sorrow, but change. The stranger didn't speak as she led him inside, his weight heavy against her slender frame. She shut the door behind them, the wind howling in the cracks, carrying the scent of rain and dust. The cabin smelled of firewood, leather, and old earth. Nothing of her husband's scent remained. It hadn't for months, but the memories lingered, like shadows cast by the dim light of the hearth. She helped him to the table, her hand steady despite the knot of suspicion tightening in her chest. His wound, shallow but ugly, bled steadily through his shirt, and the soaked coat clung to his shoulders. She'd patched up enough men in her life to know the difference between a bullet graze and a fatal wound. This man wouldn't die in her care, not today anyway. "You're in bad shape," Marianne said, her voice more cutting than she intended. "I've had worse," he muttered, settling into the chair, his gaze never quite meeting hers. "But this isn't the time for that." She didn't ask what he meant. She reached for the first aid kit, fingers moving with practiced speed as she cleaned the wound, her mind racing. He wasn't lying. She could tell that much. But the silence between them was thick with a dozen unspoken questions. What was he really doing here? Why come to her of all places? His hands rested on the table, fingers stained with blood. She worked quickly, pulling out the needle and thread to stitch the wound. The room felt too small, too hot, the weight of the situation closing in on her chest. She focused on the task at hand, sewing his skin back together, stitching together the fractures in her own reality. "I should have killed you when I had the chance," she said without thinking. He flinched, but only slightly. His eyes flicked toward her, but he said nothing, only watched her hands as she worked. There was no fear in him, no panic, just a quiet acceptance. It was unsettling. He was a stranger. He shouldn't be so calm, not after what she had just accused him of. Her anger flared, though she couldn't fully understand why. Maybe it was the man in the saddle that had bothered her so much, the stranger who had ridden back into her life on Daniel's horse, bringing only confusion and grief in his wake. Or maybe it was the silence that had followed his words, the words that spoke of promises kept and lives lost. She wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but she swallowed the bitter words. They wouldn't help. Not yet. "You didn't answer my question," she said after a long silence, her voice tight. "What happened to him?" The stranger's eyes hardened for the briefest moment, but he quickly masked it with a distant calm. "He died saving me. It was a damn fool mistake." She didn't flinch. She kept her hands steady, even though her pulse quickened. Her mind played through his words, dissecting them, looking for inconsistencies. There were none. She could tell, by the slight tremor in his voice, that the memory of it still haunted him. "He shouldn't have gone. He told me he was coming back. He promised me," she said, her throat tight. His eyes darkened, as though she had struck him. "I know," he said softly. "I know he promised you. But sometimes promises don't mean a damn thing when you're staring down the barrel of death." She finished stitching his side in silence, wiping away the last of the blood with a rough cloth. Her hands trembled as she folded the needle and thread, putting them back in the kit. He hadn't made a sound through it all, just watched her, his face unreadable. "You've been lying to me," she said, her voice low but sure. The stranger leaned back in the chair, his eyes narrowing just slightly. "What makes you say that?" She straightened up, folding her arms across her chest. "You told me Daniel died in the war, but you didn't tell me how. And now I'm supposed to believe you're some scout who, what? Just happened to be riding in the storm? Just happened to find my husband's horse and come back here?" He was silent for a long moment, his lips pressed tight. Then he sighed deeply, as if the weight of the world had finally settled on his shoulders. "Maybe I didn't come here for what you think," he said slowly, his voice thick with something she couldn't place. "Maybe I came here to die." Her eyes narrowed. "Doc, ain't no easy way to put it. I've got no family, no friends left. The war took all of that. The only thing I've got left is a promise to a dead man. And the man I promised doesn't even have a grave to rest in." Mary Ann stood in the silence that followed, her mind churning. She wanted to throw him out, to tell him to leave, to take his story and his damned horse with him. But something in his eyes stopped her, something in the way he spoke, the way his voice cracked just enough to show the pain, made her hesitate. "You don't have to stay," she said, finally breaking the silence. "But you can't leave. Not like this." He nodded, the faintest hint of relief crossing his face. He stood slowly, as though he might collapse again at any moment, and she moved to steady him, her hand brushing against his arm. "I'm not here to take your husband's place," he said quietly. "I'm just here to make sure he didn't die for nothing." She watched him, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "Then you're not here to help me." "I'm here to help you survive," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers, "whether you want it or not." The weight of his words lingered in the air, thick and unspoken. The storm outside had passed, but the air inside the cabin was still heavy, heavy with the promise of change. He wasn't here for any reason she understood yet, and she wasn't sure whether to trust him or run him off before he caused more harm than good. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. Not yet. He was right about one thing. There were no easy ways to survive this. And maybe, just maybe, this stranger was the last person she'd ever expect to help her do it. The knock came 3 days later, hard and deliberate, like a hammer striking a coffin lid. Mary Ann froze where she stood, ladle suspended over the simmering pot. She turned slowly, her eyes locking with the stranger's. He stood from the rocker by the hearth, his fingers curling into fists. He'd healed enough to move without wincing, but the quiet alertness in his body told her he expected trouble. They exchanged no words, none were needed. She crossed to the rifle hanging near the door while he stepped into the shadows, slipping a long knife from under his coat. The air had changed, thick with the scent of rain and smoke, but it wasn't the weather that soured her gut. She opened the door. 3 men stood on her porch. Their coats were worn and heavy with trail dust, and their boots scraped the old wood like sandpaper. The tallest of them tipped his hat, exposing a pale, clean-shaven face, too young to match the deadness in his eyes. "Mornin', ma'am," he said, his drawl slick as oil. "Begging your pardon, but we're looking for someone." Mary Ann held the rifle loose, but ready. "Ain't much out here to find. Who you looking for?" The youngest one, a twitchy, hollow-cheeked fellow with fingers that wouldn't stop moving, leaned forward like a dog sniffing meat. Tall fella, limp in his right leg. Might have come through on a cavalry horse with a nasty cut on his side. The tall man cut a sharp look at his companion, then turned back to Mary Ann with a half-smile. He may be taken something that don't belong to him. "Like what?" "Like a map," the tall man said, his voice colder now. "And a piece of iron that's worth more than you and every hen in your coop combined." Mary Ann stared them down, her voice steady. "I ain't seen nobody like that. Just me and the chickens out here." The tall man's smile faded. "That's so." She nodded. That's so. The man stepped forward, boots creaking on the porch. Then you won't mind if we look around a bit. Marianne didn't raise the rifle, but she didn't lower it either. I would mind. This is my land, and you've brought no badge, no papers. You start poking around, and you'll find lead faster than directions. The youngest one twitched again, his hand drifting toward his belt, but the third man, a silent bruiser with a scar that twisted his lip, held him back with a glance. The tall man chuckled, but there was no mirth in it. No need for trouble, he said. We'll be back. Marianne watched them ride off, her knuckles white against the rifle stock. Only when they disappeared into the canyon road did she step back inside and shut the door behind her. The stranger emerged from the shadows, jaw tight. They're bounty scum, he said. Work for a man named Jasper Boyd. Boyd's a mine baron turned smuggler. Got rich moving silver and Confederate gold through old army trails. Daniel, your husband, found a map, one that showed where Boyd buried some of it. Marianne's voice was quiet but sharp. And you took that map? The stranger looked away. No, Daniel gave it to me. Told me if you didn't make it, to come here. Said you'd know what to do with it. She stared at him, her heart pounding. So why lie to me? I didn't know if I could trust you, he said simply. Not after what happened. Not after I failed him. She sat down hard, the weight of it all crashing over her. Daniel had always spoken of justice like it was a living thing, something sacred. She thought he died for the country, but he died for a cause deeper and quieter. A promise. You still have it? She asked. He nodded, pulling a wrapped oilskin from under the floorboard. He laid it on the table and unrolled it slowly. The paper inside was aged, but the ink was clear. Routes through the canyons, a red X etched near the dried bed of Dust Creek. Buried treasure, maybe. Blood-soaked history, more likely. What's Boyd want it for? She asked. He's consolidating power. Wants to buy off the law, the judges, maybe even Washington. With that silver, he could. Marianne stared at the map. The weight of decision pressed down on her like the prairie sky. Then we don't run, she said finally. We don't hide. The stranger raised a brow. You mean to stand against him? Alone. I mean to do what my husband started, she said. This land, these canyons, they're mine. I know every echo, every dry wash. We use that. Set traps, split them up. Make 'em feel the ghosts of the war they never fought. He stared at her, something almost like off flickering in his eyes. You're not what I expected. Neither were you, she said. They spent the day preparing. She took him along a ridge behind the cabin where the brush grew thick and the stones gave cover. She showed him the cave Daniel once used to store winter grain, perfect now for ambush. By nightfall, they had rigged false trails, hidden snare wire, and posted lookout spots along the canyon wall. As dusk fell, Marianne sat alone on the porch, the rifle across her lap, the stranger inside cleaning his blade. The quiet stretched long and deep, until she finally broke it. You still haven't told me your name. He looked up, firelight catching the shadows on his face. Name's Eli. She nodded slowly. You're going to need to remember who you are out here, Eli. You're not just a soldier anymore. Eli's voice was quiet. No, now I'm a debt unpaid. Marianne stood, walking back inside. No, you're a reckoning. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk screamed across the canyons, and 3 riders returned on the night wind. The first shot cracked before sunrise, splitting the canyon silence like dry wood under a blade. Eli was already moving. He'd barely slept, boots on, rifle in hand. From his perch behind the rocks overlooking the cabin, he spotted the flash of a muzzle among the mesquite trees. The outlaws were trying to flank them early, counting on surprise. But Marianne had known they'd come at dawn. She knew these lands, and she knew how men thought when greed took the reins. The second shot came from her, clean and sharp. It dropped the twitchy one Billy. They'd learned his name was off his horse before he even reached the porch. The animal reared and bolted, leaving his lifeless body sprawled in the dust like a broken scarecrow. Eli moved along the ridge, staying low, ears tuned to every rustle and breath. Boyd's crew had split up, just as she predicted. One had taken the dry wash trail that led to the fake cave entrance. A steel-jaw trap waited there, half buried in sagebrush. Eli didn't need to wait long. A scream tore through the morning calm, sharp as a knife, followed by the sound of metal snapping bone. Mary Ann worked the cabin like a general, her eyes sweeping the land, rifle steady. She didn't look afraid. She looked like justice made flesh. They had boarded the windows, reinforced the doors, and left the front wide open to bait them. She was the bait. The tall one, Cain, the talker, circled from the south. He thought himself clever, taking the ridge Eli had climbed hours before. Eli met him there, crouched behind the very same rock. Cain spotted the movement too late. A fist cracked his jaw, spinning him to the ground, dazed. Eli didn't shoot. He pulled the man's coat up, saw the gleam of silver tucked inside. A second map. Different markings. Eli pressed the barrel of his Colt to Cain's temple. "Where's Boyd?" Cain coughed blood. "He's already in the house." Eli didn't hesitate. He left Cain wheezing in the dust and sprinted down the hill, heart thundering. Inside, Marian stood in the center of the room, rifle gone, hands at her sides. Boyd had her cornered, one hand around her throat, the other holding a pistol, so close it touched her ribs. He was an older man, built thick, silver streaking his beard, eyes burning with the cold certainty of someone who believed themselves untouchable. "You're a Thorn lady," he growled. "You and that cripple you married. Thought he could cheat me? Thought he could crawl back to his sweetheart and play hero." Marian didn't flinch. "You killed him." Boyd nodded. "I did. Dug 2 bullets into his chest and left him for the vultures. I gave him a choice, my gold or his honor. He chose the wrong one." Eli's voice was calm from the doorway. "He chose right." Boyd spun, but Eli fired first. The bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him back. The second hit his thigh. He dropped like stone. Marian stepped back, coughing, as Eli approached slowly, pistol still raised. Boyd glared at him, teeth bloodied. "You think this changes anything? I've got more men. I've got power." "You had fear," Marian said. "That's what kept folks quiet. But fear dies faster than gold spends." Eli searched Boyd, taking the map, his gun, and a thin notebook filled with names and numbers. Blackmail, bribes, a trail of rot winding from saloons in Arizona to bank offices in D.C. They dragged Boyd to the porch and left him there, tied and bleeding, for the law to collect. The marshal in Dust Creek wouldn't ignore this, not with names to protect his own skin on the line. When it was done, the sun had risen fully, turning the sky to copper. The bodies were buried in the back pasture, far from Daniel's grave, but close enough for Mary Ann to keep watch. She and Eli worked in silence, neither needing to speak. Something had settled between them. Respect, perhaps. A shared burden. Later, she sat alone on the porch, Daniel's old coat over her shoulders, the wind picking up again. Eli stood nearby, saddling the same horse that had brought him here. He moved slower now, less from injury than from uncertainty. "You could stay," she said quietly. "Help me rebuild. There's always work." Eli looked at her, eyes shadowed. "I wasn't built to stay. The war didn't end for me. Just moved west." She studied him a long moment, then nodded. "Will you take the map?" He shook his head. "It's safer here. Besides, it was never mine to begin with." He mounted, but before he could turn the horse, she spoke again. "Why did Daniel trust you?" Eli paused, then answered softly. "Because once I saved his life. In the thick of a charge. Took a bayonet meant for him. Never forgot it. Neither did he." She smiled, though her eyes were wet. "Then I guess he never really left." Eli rode off down the canyon path, his silhouette framed by the rising sun. Mary Ann watched until he was nothing but a dot against the red rock, then turned her gaze forward. Behind her, the house still stood, scarred but unbroken. Ahead lay more years, harder choices, and perhaps one day peace. But for now, she stood vigil on her land, where the rider had come, where the stranger had bled, and where her husband's horse had finally returned. And though the war had taken many men, it had left behind one truth. Not every hero rides in with glory. Some come limping, haunted, quiet as ghosts, and leave behind legends in their dust.